Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neurosurgery Journey. It's our pleasure to have you guys with us tonight. So your abstract has been accepted to a national meeting. Now what? Presenting research at a national conference is somewhat of a growing requisite for students interested in pursuing neurosurgery. Yet students may wonder sometimes how it's possible amidst a demanding classroom and or clinical schedule. So tonight on the journey, we're joined by third-year medical student Sangami Pugazenthi and junior pre-med student Shelei Pan, both students at Washington University in St. Louis. And we'll be discussing attending national conferences as students interested in and pursuing neurosurgery. As students, we're often eager to present our research anywhere and everywhere we can, but the logistics of travel and funding can easily limit a student's ability to attend such meetings. So if someone is able to overcome those hurdles, what do they do once they get there? And so we're going to try to attempt to delve into how students can take full advantage and maximize their benefit when attending national conferences. A conversation that we hope will help elucidate reasons for attending, options for making attendance possible, and opportunities available to students at the meeting itself. So Sangami, Shelei, great to have you guys on tonight, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Gretchen.
Yeah, of course. So I kind of introduced you guys a little bit, but do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Shelei, you want to go first?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Shelei. I'm a junior at WashU, as Gretchen said, and I've just been doing research for the past 3 to 4 years in a neurosurgery lab at the medical school here.
Awesome. Sangami?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sangami. I am a third-year med student at WashU in St. Louis. I'm actually currently on a research year between my second and third years of medical school. Predominantly do brain tumor research here, as well as a lot of other types of clinical and medical education projects within the Department of Neurosurgery at WashU.
Both are rock stars, so we're very excited to have you guys. So obviously tonight we're going to discuss a lot about meetings and conferences. So let's just start at the beginning. What kind of opportunities are available for medical students to present their research? Sangami, you want to go first?
Sure. So there are a lot of different types of opportunities ranging from local to national meetings to present your research. There's really something at every stage, I would say. And so Shirley maybe can talk more about the undergraduate experience, but from a medical student's perspective, most medical schools, I would say, have an annual research symposium type of opportunity, and that's a really easy local way to work present your research. And I think anyone working on research should really take advantage of that opportunity. It's a great, more low stakes way to get practice presenting work. There are often regional conferences. So within neurosurgery, there are things like the Southern Neurosurgical Society, the Western Neurosurgical Society, things like that. And then on a national level, the 2 major annual neurosurgical conferences within the United States is the AANS and the CNS. And there are several other national meetings that are focused on different topics within neurosurgery, different subspecialties. So the pediatric section, the tumor section, the cerebrovascular section, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a big overview ranging from local to national for medical students.
Awesome. Thanks. Shirley, are there specific conferences specifically for undergrads, or are the big meetings like the AANS and CNS also open to undergraduate students?
Yeah, so I echo everything Sangami said. On the undergrad side, too, we usually have, at least at WashU, a semi-annual research symposium. And so it's split between posters and talks. Talks, as is the case for most conferences, are more selective than posters. But regardless of what format your presentation is, it's a really good opportunity to present your research in a very low stakes manner. But as an undergrad, I also have had the opportunity to submit my work and attend national conferences.
Awesome. So is that process, I guess, similar? Is there any differences between submitting as an undergraduate or versus a med student?
Yeah, so I think both of us, Sangami and I in the past, as well as everyone else who has submitted to conferences, has submitted through the Abstract Center, which opens several months before the conference is set to happen. So you can just submit your abstracts through there, usually just a block of text, no references, no figures needed, although some conferences have moved to optional figures. But you submit through there and you cross your fingers and wait and see what, whether or not you get accepted, and if you get accepted, what format you're assigned.
Awesome. Okay. So say someone has, actually, let me take a step back. So if interested students, how can they find out more about these conferences, about like dates, deadlines, speakers that may be attending or being there, and then how can they kind of stay in the loop about future meetings?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that kind of you develop over time when you're kind of working within a specialty like neurosurgery. And so, pretty concrete ways that I would recommend is following all of these groups that we're mentioning on Twitter. Um, Things are always posted on Twitter, and people really advertise these meetings and abstract deadlines on Twitter. And so, the AANS, the CNS, the respective sections that I mentioned for different subspecialties within neurosurgery, the regional organizations, I would recommend you just follow all of them on Twitter and just kind of check your Twitter now and then. The other thing you can do is to be a medical student, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Shirley, as an undergraduate member, you can sign up for membership for these organizations, at least the AANS and the CNS, and that's free of charge. And so that's a great way to just stay up to date with what the organizations are doing. And they'll send you emails now and then giving you updates on the meetings and when the abstract deadlines are, and kind of staying up to date with those things. So I would recommend definitely signing up to be a member, as well as following Twitter accounts, I think are both great ways.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Shirley.
Yeah, Twitter has been absolutely amazing in keeping me up to date with everything that's happening, whether it be, conferences and what's going on in that regard, or publications, and staying up to date with the literature. I've also found subscribing to a lot of their mailing lists is very helpful, because I have my Outlook app on my iPhone, so I can just see those pop up. Sometimes when so many things happen on Twitter, having Outlook as a second kind of reinforcement is very helpful for me. I will say I do not think that there's currently a mechanism for undergrads to have membership in AANS or CNS or the sections. I know that some other not specifically neuroscience, organizations and such as SNO do, but AANS and CNS I don't believe have that mechanism at the moment.
Gotcha. Are these memberships free for students, or is there a fee that you have to pay?
The AANS and CNS memberships are both free. I've also signed up to be a member of the PED section as well as the tumor section, and all of those have been free for myself so far as a medical student member.
Okay, great. So say someone has a project ready to go. How do they decide which of these conferences to submit their research to?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there are a few approaches. You can think about your topic area for sure. And so usually the way that I think about it is what deadlines are coming up. And so when do I have data ready? And then when is the deadline? Something to think about is usually for a lot of these conferences, you can't submit abstracts for data that has already been published. And so kind of the point of the conferences are to present up and coming data and stuff that's cutting edge, things that are going to be published in the future. And so if you are getting ready to submit a manuscript, it would be a good idea to think about which conference you want to submit this work to. And so thinking about which conference deadlines are coming up, and then of those, which ones would make sense from a topic perspective, I think is really the way that I've been doing it so far, and I think has worked well. Another conference that Shirley had mentioned in passing that I wanted to also mention is the Society for Neuro-Oncology, or SNO. There are a lot of different types of scientists and practitioners and clinicians that go to that meeting, but there is always a big neurosurgical presence also at SNO. So any type of neuro-oncology research would be a great submission as well to SNO. So that's kind of the way I approach it. Shirley, do you have anything else you do?
Yeah, I don't have anything in particular to, add. However, I sometimes do defer to my mentor and or ask my mentor for their thoughts on which conferences to submit to, because there may be other, considerations that I am not aware of because I am a student still, such as, where it has the audience that may be, most active in giving feedback and or discussion, because another component to conferences is receiving that discussion and being a part of those discussions on what may be added to your research to make it better and bring it to the next level.
Awesome. Sangami, you kind of mentioned submitting to conferences before your data is actually published. Are there certain rules about submitting or presenting the same research to multiple conferences?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think few conferences have guidelines on that, and so I would really encourage everyone that's submitting to really make sure you're kind of combing through the guidelines and making sure that you're adhering to whatever the guidelines for that conference is, because often it is different. Something that I didn't know about that when I kind of started working on these things is if you have one manuscript with a whole bunch of data, that doesn't mean that whole bunch of data needs to be in one abstract. And so even if the conference has a policy where you can't submit data that has been presented elsewhere, you can still present data from a paper that you are going to write as multiple abstracts to the same conference, to different conferences. And so that's kind of a way to break up a lot of the data, especially talking about basic science work. It's a lot of data that you collect, and it's really important. And often these presentations are just a few minutes long. And so I think it's a great idea to kind of split it up sometimes, depending on the topic and the data that's being presented. And so that is definitely allowed, and a lot of people do it. Regarding abstracts that have been presented elsewhere, I think it really is conference dependent. So I'd encourage people to look at those guidelines before submitting.
Yeah. Shirley, I know you've mentioned to me before, you kind of have a little rule of thumb as far as like local versus regional versus national presentations.
Yeah. So again, always check with the conference to see what their policy is. But generally, if you present something, at a school or an institution or, a local conference, usually it's okay to send it to a national conference as well. However, it is conference dependent, and just always make sure to, maintain the rigor in checking with the conference to make sure you're not unintentionally breaking any guidelines.
Yeah, great. Okay, so let's kind of take a step back and let's talk about costs. Are these meetings free, or how should a student anticipate paying, like for their travel, lodging, all of that sort of stuff?
They are definitely not free. And so some conferences will have registration fees. And so not all of them do, particularly the CNS meeting, which is usually in the fall every year, is of no cost for medical students to register. However, there's always cost associated with traveling if you don't live in the city that the conference is located in. You have flights, you have Ubers, you need a place to stay, and then the cost of food for those few days. And, costs really add up. And I think it's a huge barrier for students, unfortunately. And I think that getting creative is kind of the best way to do it, and having a plan is really good. I think also having open discussion with your mentor about how this might be funded and kind of what you're able to contribute or not contribute on the front end, I think is really valuable. And so things that I've found luck with is, there are ways for your department of neurosurgery that you work with to fund the research, but not always. And so having a conversation with whoever in the department is kind of responsible for that is really important. Your mentor might have lab funds, grant money, or discretionary funds that they're able to use. And then the other thing is your medical school. From a med student's perspective, some medical schools do have conference travel funding, often is limited, and won't cover an entire trip. But you can piece together some of these things. So maybe your mentor is able to pay for your flight, and your school can pay for your hotel, and someone else, the department's paying for your registration. And so it's not always so easy, but I think it's worth it, and trying to figure out ways to make it happen, I think, is really important. And, Shirley and I and Gretchen have all had great times at these meetings. And so I would really encourage people to try to make it happen. Even though the financial burden can be really high, like trying to get creative, I think is really a valuable thing to invest in. And the last thing I'll say is trying to build a network of students that you see at these meetings is really awesome, because it's also often a lot of the same students who are going to a lot of the meetings. And because of that, you can figure out ways to share Ubers from the airport, potentially get a hotel room together, things like that to diminish costs. So that's another great way to try to reduce the cost. But unfortunately, there are high costs associated with a lot of the meetings, and can definitely be a barrier.
For sure. It's so important. And you just described that so eloquently, Sangami. Shirley, so outside of funding from your PI or the department, are there any grants that students can apply for specifically, or scholarships that students can use for traveling, anything like that?
Yeah, so as Sangami said, if you get creative, usually you can find some grants as well that may cover the specific subtopic in which in which your research kind of applies. And so, similar to what Sangami said on the undergrad side, there is a general conference award, but there are also several schools within Washington University, such as the Brown School, and the School of Public Health and whatnot, that may have smaller funding mechanisms that can be applied to your research if your research falls within one of the topics that they fund for.
Okay, so there's ways out there, but you just got to find them, is what I'm hearing. Yeah. Okay, so let's say you submitted an abstract, you got funding all figured out. Now, what is the feasibility of actually traveling and attending these meetings when you're in the middle of classroom work and courses and clerkships? How do you get time off? Are professors understanding? Or what if you have an exam? How does that work? We'll start with Sangami. How does that work being in med school?
Yeah, so it's, I would say, easier in your preclinical years, because those classes, at least at our med school, are not always mandatory. And so you can always watch a recorded lecture at a later date. Even mandatory sessions are easier to make up when it's preclinical work and not clinical work. And so personally, I haven't had a lot of trouble from that standpoint. And I think I'm very lucky that our school is really supportive of conference travel and medical students participating in research and being able to present that. And I don't know if that's really a unanimous type of institution, but I think that's the way it is here. Clerkships and clinical rotations are a bit harder because you can't really make up the work that you missed that day. And so I think for the majority of the time, the conferences usually will be over the weekend. So the national meetings are usually overlap with the weekend for at least a couple of days. And so I think the AANS this year is from Thursday to Tuesday or Thursday to Monday, and then CNS is something similar. And so I think the big thing that I would do is, when you submit to a conference, you should expect that if your abstract is accepted, how are you going to make it happen? And so that's from a financial standpoint, as well as getting time off of school. And so at our school, we have a very cut and dry policy for clerkships. You can only miss 3 clinical days per clerkship, which spans 2 months. And so I've left multiple times for 2 different conferences in 2 different clerkships, and missed, I think, 2 or 3 days for each of those. And so it was fine because it fell within the policy at our institution. However, I was definitely taking a risk, because if I got sick, like I didn't have any sick days left. I basically used those for the conference. And so I think there is a risk with that, at least with our institution's policy, and I was able to make it work and was lucky to. But usually people are really willing to work with you, and you can always talk to your Dean of Student Affairs. Also, we have a Dean of Medical Student Research that we work with here. So I think just being proactive, communicating with your team, your clinical team, that you'll be out for a couple of days and, you'd be happy to, pick back up with the patients when you get back, and talking to your deans and your clerkship director on the front end, I think I think they will really appreciate it and be more likely to let you miss a couple of days. And personally, I haven't had any troubles with getting days off, and have been able to go, but I think that being proactive is really important.
Yeah. How early do you need to have those conversations with those deans or your preceptor?
So I have those conversations when my abstracts are accepted. So usually abstracts are accepted a few months prior to the meeting. I would say maybe 3 months for the national meetings. And so that usually is ample time to talk to the administration. You probably won't know who's on your team 3 months in advance. You may not even know like what service you're on 3 months in advance, but you can talk to your administrators at the time when your abstracts are accepted, and you'll say, I had abstracts accepted for a poster or talk, and I'd really love the opportunity to go and present the work that we've been working really hard on. And then when the time comes closer and you meet the team that you'll be working with for those days that you'll be off, I would have a conversation with them and just say, these days I'll be out for a conference, but I'll be back and I'm happy to make up the work any way I can. So just as soon as possible is really the best. I think once your abstracts are accepted, that's at least the earliest time that I would have that conversation.
Okay, so just kind of open and honest conversation from the get-go. Mm-hmm. Shelei, does that seem like your experience as well, or is there any differences with being in undergrad courses?
Yeah, so I think what Sangami said about her preclinical years was very much, what I experienced with my professors. And, similarly, just my rule of thumb is always be proactive and be respectful. Because at the end of the day in undergrad, while your classes may seem disposable at times, there is, a human teaching the classes, and you did sign up to be a student first. And so I always, try to have those conversations as soon as I hear that the abstract's been accepted. And then I've, had trouble once before with a professor in a lab class. We were able to get it resolved eventually, and I was able to make up the lab because labs aren't really, things that you can just skip, and it creates a headache for everyone to rearrange. But I think at the end of the day, it was just a lot of open communication, sending over the email saying that my abstract had gotten accepted, documentation, and eventually we were able to come to a solution for it. And the other thing is sometimes when I do, because undergrad classes, especially the big science classes, my experience has been, they're always Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So you really don't have that block of 3-4 days that you can take off. On days like that where I really can't miss a class that's not recorded, I will maybe fly in, Tuesday night, present on Wednesday, and then fly out so that I'm able to be back in time for my Thursday class.
Gotcha. Short trips. Okay, great. Okay, let's get to the good stuff now. Shelei, we'll start with you. Why should undergraduate students submit research to these conferences and attend these conferences?
Yeah, so as an undergrad, especially when you're at a research institution like WashU, everyone's involved in research, it seems like. And I think that, one, it's nice after you've been working for so long on a research project to be able to present it to someone, see what other people's perspectives are, because everyone's an expert in something, and getting multiple experts together and having those discussions really, helps inspire you, helps you see what's out there. But two, you meet so many nice people, so many great, amazing people who are very inspiring. Just from the conferences that I've attended, met so many really awesome awesome medical students who've been super amazing and super, welcoming to me and answering any of my questions that I have related to my future career steps, education, whatnot. And I think it's also very nice to see what other research is out there, because when you're in lab all day and you see what's going on around you, you see what you're doing, you read the literature, but seeing what's up and coming and what other people's hypotheses are, and the different schools of thought within your specific research field can be very eye-opening and help you think from multiple perspectives when you go back and think about your next projects and what's to come.
So fun. Sangami, are there any other different motivations for med students to go?
Yeah, I think that for medical students specifically trying to go into neurosurgery, I think there are a lot of positives and reasons to attend the meetings. And so the first thing, a disclaimer, is that I have not applied for the match. And so these are my own opinions and I don't know the answers, but I will say that I've gotten a lot of advice that presenting your work at conferences can be really positively seen when you apply for the match, because it really shows that you're able to communicate your science. You're not just, holed away in your lab and your computer and writing all these manuscripts, but you're really able to communicate and have open discussions, like Shelei said, with a wider neurosurgical audience. And so that audience will include attendings, other medical students, residents. And so it can definitely be intimidating as a medical student to get up there and talk about your research in front of a lot of experts that have been doing this stuff a lot longer than you. But I think it's really valuable, and everyone has been really kind and welcoming to me as well at these meetings. But the other things I think that people don't think about as often, which is really beneficial, is that you meet a lot of people at these meetings. There are huge academic presences at these meetings from large academic institutions, and even neurosurgeons that aren't in academics come to these meetings. And so you have an opportunity to network pretty widely. A lot of these meetings, especially the national meetings, there are really thousands of people there. And so that can range from making friends with other medical students who are going into neurosurgery, residents who might be your senior residents one day, and then, of course, attendings who might be working on the same type of research as you, might be an attending at an institution you're interested in continuing your training at, and things like that. And so I've found that the meetings have really broadened my kind of perspective on neurosurgery, and especially what is happening in the field of neurosurgery within our own institution and other institutions. So I think there are a lot of positives to going to these conferences beyond just the research even.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I echo that as well. So you both touched on two things that I kind of want to circle back to. Sangami, you're talking about presenting in front of residents and physicians and stuff. For someone who hasn't been there, what does that actually look like? Like, what kind of set the stage? Like, what's kind of the environment you're in when you're presenting your research at a conference?
Yeah, so there are different types of presentations, like Shirley alluded to previously. And so one type of presentation is a poster presentation. And so that is typically similar to what you would do at a poster presentation at your own institution, if you have that. And so it's usually a big hall, like an auditorium kind of space, where there are tons of posters, like 100+ posters lined up. And at the allotted time, you kind of go next and stand next to your poster, and there are a lot of people walking around, and people might stop by your poster and ask you about your research. You should probably have a 1 to 2 minute spiel about your project that you can give them, and then be able to answer any questions and have discussions with anyone who's interested in your work. And so that's a poster presentation. Something I experienced last year at the CNS actually was like a mini podium presentation. I had not kind of known what that was before that meeting. And so that was kind of actually during the poster presentation. They had set up 4 podiums in the corner of this massive room. And so there were little podiums like a little bit elevated off the ground, and there was a little TV next to us, and you had about 3 minutes for your presentation if you were chosen to give that type of presentation. So it's super short, and just a few slides kind of highlighting your work. And so while everyone was walking around looking at the posters, they could also stop by those corners of the room to hear what the mini podium presenters were talking about. And so that was kind of a new format for me. And so I wasn't really familiar with that until CNS last year, which I thought was a great addition to the poster session. And then the last type of presentation is an oral presentation, usually is how it's listed on a abstract portal, or talk is more informally, people just call it a talk. And so those are usually, in my experience, like 6-ish minute presentations. Usually there's only one presenter in each room going at one time. And so it's a larger room, but not as big as that type auditorium type room. There are a ton of chairs in there. Usually it's based on topics. So there might be a pediatric session. And so there might be 10 abstracts that are going to be presented in that session. Each presenter has 6 minutes. And so you walk up to the front of the room. There's a big projector. You have slides prepared, and you kind of just run through your slides you run through your slides for 6 minutes in front of the audience that's sitting there. And then the next presenter will go up. They have it in different formats in terms of questions. Sometimes they have it so that you have 1 minute of questions after your presentation. Sometimes it's at the end of the session after all 10 presenters have gone. Then the floor is open for questions for anyone. So that's kind of an overview, I think, of 3 pretty common presentation methods.
I really like the idea of the mini podiums. It's kind of like a step between posters and then the actual like big talks, as you mentioned. Shelei, so next question for you. So let's say you're at your poster presentation or you're giving an oral presentation and you know your research like the back of your hand, you know every part of it in and out, but what do you do, or how do you handle a question that you don't know the answer to?
Yeah, and so my go-to is always, first, thank you. I've never thought of that question before, something along the lines of that. And it's, okay to take a reasonable pause between when you get the question, when you start answering, to think it through. And then you can always say something along the lines of, I really hadn't thought in that direction before. I really haven't, that's a great point. I haven't really thought about that before. I need to, either read more into this, or, we have experiments undergoing for this, to answer that question. And then for smaller presentations, if on the local level or at the institutional level, you can say something along the lines of, I can get back to you. And if you say that, try to follow up with it, especially as a student. When you're a student and you say that, and it's something within your capacity to do, or if you actually go do the experiment later and get a result, it's always good to follow up and kind of close that loop. But on the national level, I haven't ever gotten that type of question before where I've said, let me get back to you, because it's one, probably not going to happen. I'm probably not going to get back to that person. And so I always just, don't panic, take a second, tell them it was a really good question, because it probably was a really good question. And then say something, just close the loop and, show that you're taking their comment into consideration, and that that's a potential line of investigation that you would like to pursue in the future.
Nice. Like short, casual, keep it good. So you've also both touched on networking. So Shelei, what could networking as an undergrad look like at these national conferences?
Yeah. So I guess first step with medical students, it's been really nice for me to kind of meet the medical students that are there. They've all been super nice to kind of take me under their wing and let me go along with them as they talk to other medical students that they know. And sometimes if I, see one of my medical student friends is talking to a group of residents or talking to an attending, I might, just join in the conversation, kind of listen to what they have to say, because they are, years and years ahead of me, and they have years and years of wisdom that I don't have yet. And anything they say is something that, has potential to be really informative for me. And then sometimes if my mentor is at that conference, if there's someone who's within the same field of research and or expresses interest in a particular aspect of the work that I'm presenting, they might introduce me and say, this is the student that led this research, and then I'll introduce myself briefly, say my name is Shirley, say what I am, I'm an undergraduate student, and then kind of I like to let them lead the conversation and kind of gauge their level of interest, because the last thing I want to do is be talking for minutes and minutes and minutes, and because that's not reading the room, and that's not a great impression.
Okay, so you're kind of saying you sort of focus on getting to know med students, and then maybe any like faculty or other people that your mentor knows, and kind of engaging in those conversations. Yeah. Sangami, would you say that's pretty similar, or are there other aspects that medical students should really focus on as far as networking at these conferences?
Yeah, I think that's really similar. I think medical students probably have different goals than obviously an undergraduate student. And so applying to neurosurgery residency is probably on everyone's the forefront of their minds. And so I think that being a junior medical student at these conferences is probably a little bit different from a networking perspective than a senior medical student at these conferences. And so something that I've found is really exciting and really I appreciate about going to conferences is that usually there are a lot of WashU residents and faculty and medical students and Shirley at the conferences. And so we have a pretty good group usually in a representative like portion. And so they're always really kind, the same way Shirley said the med students take her under their wing. Like I feel like the residents kind of take me under their wing and, text me when they are getting dinner or doing going to a certain session and things like that. And I think that conferences are a great opportunity to network not only with people that you don't know, but even people that you do know, even at your home institution. And so it's a lot easier to talk to an attending who's at the WashU dinner than talk to them in the OR when there's a lot of things happening and I'm on service. And so I found that going to conferences has really strengthened even my relationships with my home program. Even though that we all are in the same place every day at home, the conferences really bring a lot of people together. And I think that's really a huge benefit I saw in my junior years of medical school. I've heard a lot about kind of as you get closer to match time and as you're applying to ERAS, thinking about where you might be interested in pursuing residency, seeing who's at the conferences at those schools, making sure that you're aware of the type of research they do at that institution. And if that's something you're interested in doing yourself in residency, then it would be great to, be going to some of those talks at those institutions to see if there's work there that, you might be interested in pursuing when you get there. Reaching out to residents who presented their work after, they present, instead of just going up to them and just saying, hey, like, I really want to go to residency, like at your school, at your program, really talking to them about why you thought their research was interesting and talk to them about why, like questions you had about their work, ideas you had about, where you think that their work could lead in the future. I think people really respond well to that when you show interest in their work. The same way Shirley was saying, people showing interest in her work, I think goes both ways. And so even though you're a medical student or an undergraduate student, people really are excited when you're excited about something. So that's something I think is really valuable too, is when you see work that you are really impressed with and you have something to add to the conversation, I think is totally appropriate to go up to the presenter afterwards and have a conversation about that.
Nice. Okay, so you both kind of touched on some networking, and I kind of like how it's sort of a stepwise kind of who you kind of focus your time and energy towards. And it makes sense, just as with education and training is happens in a stepwise fashion. So you mentioned poster presentations, talks. Are there any other opportunities at these conferences to just kind of chat with people as far as like other med student meetups, or Sangami, you mentioned dinners, anything else that goes on?
Yeah, so usually if you are there with, I shouldn't say usually, I should say that some institutions that particularly have a lot of representation at the conferences usually will have one night where they organize a dinner or drinks for everyone from that institution who's at the conference. And they will basically say, and usually they include the medical students in that. And so I would definitely recommend going to that. Um, Other things, there are often a lot of receptions that are organized by the national meetings. So there's usually young neurosurgeons reception, and usually they include medical students in that. Things like the tumor section reception I went to one year, and that was great to just meet other people interested in tumor research. Um, the women in neurosurgery section of the AANS and CNS often has different social events as well. In the upcoming AANS, they have a gala, which is going to be really great. They have a breakfast, and so a lot of the things are not just science oriented. It's a lot of networking, and it's really built to be that way, and socializing, and meeting up with friends that may not be living in the same city as you, and things like that. So there are a lot of opportunities. I would say that you should definitely look at the program. A lot of the things are actually just in the program. And lastly, I would just like to plug at the CNS, I think we are going to try to organize more medical student meetups and things like that. So stay tuned for kind of more information, especially for CNS upcoming this fall. But I think that medical students usually at these meetings are really excited to meet other medical students. So it doesn't have to be in a formal meetup type of way, but even if you just see someone who looks like a medical student or has it on their badge, usually it says medical student on it, I would encourage everyone to be friendly and talk to students and network and make friends from other institutions.
Yeah, I've heard meetings are a really good time. Shirley, is there anything specific for undergrads, or you guys just kind of go wherever the med students go, kind of wherever?
Yeah, so I didn't submit anything to CNS last year, but in 2021 there was a med student like info session in which they had a lot of the program directors having a panel, and pretty much I think it was a huge crowd of medical students was sitting in the audience, and the program directors, presented their programs, and afterwards medical students were allowed to go up and ask questions, and then they had a reception afterwards in which residents from a lot of the programs were, mingling with the medical students over food, and it was a really good time to, at which I was observing, other medical students that I know, talking to the residents, and also medical students talking to each other, because I know that a lot of the medical students knew each other from sub-Is or had seen each other along the trail, and so there was a lot of socialization there. And same thing with some of the other conferences. Between sessions, they'll also have breaks in which they'll have drinks and or food there, and just time, space to allow for everyone to say hi to each other, catch up, network, and or talk about research.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. Okay, so we do have a question here in the chat. Let me pull it up here. So what if you don't have any research to present, or you didn't submit anything to a conference? When can you still go, or what can you do at a conference when you don't have research to present?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a ton of value. Hopefully, we've explained all of the value in attending conferences beyond just presenting research. And so I would definitely encourage you to try to attend the meetings if you're able to, even if you don't have research to present, because I think is a lot of value. So I guess is the question kind of, I would say generally it's harder to get funding to go if you don't have research to present, in my experience. it's a lot easier to convince someone to pay for you to go if you have research to present. When I say someone, I mean like a institution, like a department or a lab fund or something like that, or grant money. And so I would say that if you want to go, you should definitely go, but just be aware that it might be harder to get funded as well as harder to get time off of your coursework if you don't have research. But if it's on a weekend and you live there and registration's fee, like that's free, then that's awesome. And I would really encourage you to go. And hopefully we've touched on some of the things that you can participate in, even without having a presentation yourself. There are medical student sessions that are really helpful for applying for residency, choosing a program, doing well on sub-Is. There are hands-on labs, there are social events, and a lot of really great things that happen at these meetings. And of course, learning from other people's research is really invaluable as well. So personally, I think it's a great idea if you're able to attend.
Awesome. Shelei, anything you'd like to add?
I completely agree with everything Sangami said, but it's probably more applicable to medical students than undergrads, because I think there are select undergrad conferences that exist that may be good for undergrad networking with other undergrads and potentially grad students and or faculty. But from an undergrad attending a neurosurgery conference for the sake of attending and networking, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just think it might be more applicable to medical students than undergrads.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's been really great to have you guys on tonight. Any closing remarks or anything we haven't touched on that you want to make sure our audience is aware of regarding attending conferences as students?
I would just say that I think Shelei and I hopefully have both kind of echoed that it's been a really great time going to these meetings. We think it's really valuable. It can be hard to sometimes get funding and time off and those things, but if you're able to work those things out, I think it's really valuable to submit abstracts and attend and network and meet people. And we've really enjoyed doing that. So hopefully some of you guys decide to go to the next one. We'll see you there.
Awesome. Well, we've been joined with Sangami and Shelei Pan, both from WashU tonight. Thank you both so much for being here. It was so much fun talking about this with you guys. And for our audience, thank you for being here tonight with us as well and for the questions. As always, like and subscribe to our social media pages and YouTube pages, and feel free to listen to this recording later on if you see so. But thanks, guys, and we will see you next week.